The London Midland Scottish Railway, simply referred to as LMS, was the largest of the four 1923 grouping railways in Britain. It boasted two trunk routes, the shorter Midland Main Line, from London to Leeds, via Leicester and Derby. The other main line, the West Coast Main Line, connecting London and Glasgow via Birmingham, Crewe and Carlisle. Compared to the London and North Eastern Railway, or LNER, East Coast Main Line route, the West Coast was the longer and more difficult route to Scotland, due to the severe and more frequent gradients. Upon the formation of the LMS, a design from one of its constituent companies was chosen to power the heaviest expresses over these gradients. Although technically not a constituent due to having merged with the London and North Western Railway, or LNWR, a year before the grouping, it was the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railways Class 8 which became the first ever LMS standard heavy express design. The Class 8, later to become known as Dreadnoughts, had 4 cylinders but were incredibly underpowered, only being rated as Power Classification 5. It didn't help matters that in 1925 Henry Fowler took the position of Chief Mechanical Engineer, replacing the designer of the Dreadnoughts, George Hughes. With Fowler assigned the new CME, all of the higher-up positions on the LMS were occupied by ex-Midland Railway staff. The Midland Railway, the original constructors of the Midland Main Line, had a small locomotive policy. This meant that their operating practices were short, frequent trains. Along the Midland Main Line, this proved manageable, but on the West Coast Main Line, this simply did not work. Fowler tried to combat the old Midland strategy by commissioning the North British Locomotive Company of Glasgow for a 3-cylinder 460 express locomotive, resulting in the Royal Scot class. It wasn't until William Arthur Stanier was recruited from the Great Western Railway in January 1932 that the LMS was finally brought up to speed. Under his direction, the LMS constructed its first pair of Pacific locomotives in 1933, numbered 6200 Princess Royal and 6201 Princess Elizabeth. The GWR influence is as clear as day. Cylinder layout, boiler design, clearly visible top feeds. Stanier applied his 41 years worth of experience with the GWR to all of his original designs. The story goes that Stanier simply asked his old superiors at the Great Western for a set of drawings for the King class, which were granted. Stanier's 462s were intended to be used as top-link locomotives, and they proved worthy successors to the Royal Scots, themselves riddled with flaws stemming from their rushed construction and inherent Midland influence. The new Pacifics were called Princesses, and the first batch of locomotives was to be completed in 1933, although it wasn't until 1936 that the third of the trio left Crewe works. This locomotive was not driven by cylinders, but by a turbine, and was aptly named the Turbomotive. A joint effort of Crewe Works, the Ljungström Turbine Company of Sweden, and Metropolitan Vickers Electrical Company Limited, the Turbomotive lasted until 1952. Meanwhile, the conventional Princesses were driven by 4 cylinders, themselves driven by 4 sets of Walschaerts valve gear. Yes, I'm pronouncing it the Belgian way. Another new feature on the LMS were the 4,000-gallon tenders fitted. As for coal, the locomotives could carry 9 tons of it. This tender was only fitted to the locomotives in 1935, after the original Fowler-designed tender proved too small. The 1935 rebuild saw both the Pacifics being fitted with an improved boiler, with a total of 32 superheater elements. The old design had a mere 16. After the initial teething troubles were sorted, which also included adjustment to the motion, the second batch of 10 was churned out from July 1935 to October of that year. All were named after female royalty, the last 3 differing the pattern by not actually having the word princess in their names. The 12 locomotives plus the turbomotive were used on the heavy expresses on the LMS system, most notably the Royal Scot train and the Midday Scot trains. Due to the wide fireboxes that the Pacific wheel arrangement allows, the Princesses were the first locos on the LMS which could travel from London to Glasgow without changing engines. The 6100 Royal Scot class, which hauled the Anglo-Scottish expresses before the Princesses did, needed to change engines at Carlisle due to their narrow fireboxes requiring cleaning by then. In 1935, the construction of number 6207 Princess Arthur of Connaught was the main subject of a 40-minute long documentary, Number 6207, A Study in Steel. But even after that, the Lizzies, as the class was affectionately referred to by enginemen, had one major publicity stunt in them. In November 1936, a test run, conducted as a way to find out if prestige Anglo-Scottish expresses were in any way possible, saw number 6201 Princess Elizabeth setting a record for steam traction. The locomotive accelerated its train to an average speed of 70 miles an hour between London and Glasgow without stopping. It roared up the notorious Beatty Bank with a minimum 58 miles an hour, climbing the 10 miles of average gradients of 1 in 75 in just 9.5 minutes. The return run saw even greater speeds, arriving 16 minutes early, greatly exceeding the northbound run at just 7 minutes early. Stanier wasn't present for the record-breaking runs. He was in India at the time, on government business. The responsibility for the trials was therefore in the hands of his principal assistant, some 44-year-old named Robert Riddles. But it was this very record-breaking which was to result in the Princess Royals being displaced. After all the modifications had been made and improvements implemented, in 1937 the Coronation class emerged from crew works. They were bigger, better, faster, stronger, and bulbously streamlined. On the inaugural run, number 6220 Coronation became the fastest steam locomotive in the world. The Lizzies, whilst still capable and admired by their crews, were old news. Despite this, the Lizzies were still very much on the minds of children when, after breaking the record, the Hornby Trains brand, owned by Meccano Limited, released an O-scale model of 6201 Princess Elizabeth. With the luxurious expresses to Scotland handed over to more powerful machines, the full-scale Lizzies were essentially ordinary express locomotives on the LMS system, although they, like the Coronations which superseded them, were banned along the Midland Main Line. They were to the LMS what the A3s were to the A4s on the LNER in layman's terms. By the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, examples of the Princess class were allocated to London Camden, Crewe North, Liverpool Edge Hill, Carlisle Kingmore, as well as Carlisle Upperby, or Upperby, I've only seen that, I've never seen it pronounced, and Glasgow Polmadie. The railways of Britain were nationalised in 1948, and all of the Princesses, including the turbomotive in its turbine-driven form, became BR locomotives. Under BR, the class wore a myriad of liveries, including black, blue, green, and their original crimson paint jobs. They became the regular locomotives on the Merseyside Express, a non-stop train from London Euston to Liverpool, introduced in the 1950s. And although they were too heavy for a lot of the ex-LMS lines, they were not uncommon on fish trains in the northwest and Scotland. Though perhaps their most unusual exploit was the allocation of two of the class to Aldo Common in London, previously a Great Western depot. In 1956, the Western Division withdrew the King-class locomotives for modifications to their front bogies, and the Princesses were deemed the only suitable stand-ins. But come the 1960s, diesel power began to take over from steam on the passenger services. Naturally, one of the first steam engine types to be eliminated by diesels were the express locomotives. The first withdrawal of a Princess locomotive was the turbomotive, rebuilt to conventional form in 1952. Not even in traffic for 8 weeks, the locomotive was damaged in a collision and was deemed to be beyond economic repair. By 1962, the Princess class was considered dead and buried, the last one being withdrawn in November of that year. Kingmore and Polmadie providing these locomotives with a home to their ultimate demise. Two examples of Princess locomotives are preserved, one of them in working order. LMS number 6201 Princess Elizabeth and LMS number 6203 Princess Margaret Rose. The former broke new grounds because it was the first time a preservation group purchased a locomotive of such scale and complexity. The latter owes its existence to Billy Butlin, who purchased it for display in his holiday camp in Pwllheli. Number 6201 can be seen today running rail tours and other steam specials along the UK network. Shap Bank and the Lickey Incline can be stormed by a princess once again. Hi folks, this is the first episode of GGL which was suggested by a viewer, which means yes, I do read the comments. Every suggestion I get I write down, so don't be afraid to forward an interesting loco. That being said, recently I asked what locos you lot would like to see, and a few of the results, namely the LBSCR A1 and the Southern Railway Pacifics, I won't cover. Ever. Other content creators such as Chris Eden Green and Railway Mania have covered these classes extensively, and I don't feel like ripping too many pages out of their books and stepping on their toes too much. Besides, Chris's documentaries only cost like £2 a pop, so I urge any of you to check them out. I'll link his website down below. I also won't ever cover the Gresley or Peppercorn Pacifics because, come on, have some originality. Speaking of Pacifics, the Princesses are particularly interesting to me because after the introduction of the Duchesses, or Coronations, the history of Stanier's first Pacific just kind of ends. It's the same story as with the Thomson Pacifics, really. They were built, people made a big fuss about them, look away for 1 second, and suddenly it's 1966 and all the A2/3s were withdrawn. Anyway, if you like this video, there is a playlist coming up with all the other TGL episodes. And I hope to see you for the next one. Cheerio.